juggling challenges and successes, and we're gonna really start leaning into some successes right now. What we want to make sure for all of you is that you're leaving here having felt heard and able to really sort of voice those challenges that you're facing, but also that you leave with some optimism about the opportunities for success ahead. And so we've asked Janet and Brian and Rick to join us on this panel today to talk about some of the successes that they've been having in their local governments, and then to sort of open up a dialogue so we can hear successes from the room, right? So this panel is going to be going on for the next 75 minutes or so, and during that time we want to be making sure that we're sort of communicating to each other, not just hearing from the panel, but the panel's kind of going to juice us, right? Kind of get us flowing, and also help serve as some wisdom to the degree that they can to some of the successes that you all are working on as well. So just to kick things off, if I could ask each one of you to just briefly introduce yourself, and then we'll go ahead and kick off and start talking about some successes.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Janet Miller. I work with the City of Savannah in our Office of Sustainability, and I serve as the Clean Energy Program Coordinator. So Savannah has a team of 2 that works with clean energy. It is me and Alicia Brown, who is currently our Clean Energy Manager and also our Interim Director. So our 100% Savannah plan revolves around achieving 100% clean energy by 2035 when it comes to electricity, and 100% clean community energy by 2050. So our plan uses 45 strategies to achieve this robust plan. Those 45 go into 5 main categories, which are energy efficiency, renewable energy, transportation and mobility, community and economic development, and education and engagement. And even though this is clean energy, we try to infuse equity as much as we can. When you're living in a city like Savannah, there's a lot of historical inequities, and we try to find very innovative ways to kind of readdress those problems. A little bit about myself personally. I come from a public health background. I'm a recent graduate of the University of Georgia, and my bachelor's is in environmental health, and I used to work in climate and health with the New Orleans Health Department.
Brian Blackman, Sustainability Director for the City of Knoxville. We do everything. We're a sustainability department. We do clean energy, we do electric vehicle charging, obviously one of the reasons we're here today. Show of hands, how many of you, as your department, own, manage charging assets? How many of you are thinking about whether or not you want that as a headache? Okay. So good to know. We own and manage charging assets. So when my fleet department says we've got new EVs on the way, we actually spec, build, own, operate, select the rate, pay the bill. We do all of that. We also work with our transit agency on low-no grants, and we've got some transit folks in here, help them spec EV charging, and we also work with them on kind of like rate design things. Can you adjust your operations to miss demand peaks? So we do a little bit of any of that. I'm happy to talk to any of you if you got questions here or afterwards to figure out if that's something you really want to tackle. I've been doing this for over 9 years now. I'm pretty opinionated generally, but very opinionated about like what amount of headaches as a small staff I'm willing to take on. And there are some things where, network charging, I have very controversial opinions about why I don't like it in public settings, because it's not that much electricity cost, but the rate of failure on those are really high. So, those are some like the practicalities of, I can't deal with that amount of public calls coming in and constantly having to respond to them. It's actually cheaper and more effective for my staff just to give the electricity away and say, yeah, there's some loss, but we're losing money anyway. We're losing staff time, we're paying network fees, et cetera, things like that. But happy to dive into any of that.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rick Longbard. I'm the Fleet Operations Manager for the City of Raleigh. Did you say these are success stories?
These are success stories.
Yes. Look, and we're all struggling through this. I think we have some pretty good examples of our success. We'll be happy to share those with you. But just to give you a little background about myself and the city of Raleigh. My name is again Rick Longbard. 40 years in the fleet management industry. I worked for 3 different municipal agencies in California. Please don't hold that against me. Recently moved to North Carolina, Raleigh in 2021. Have been sitting on a variety of initiatives. One of the reasons why they recruited me from California is to help them transition to electrification. And I think we've been very successful from the 2 years that we've been working on it thus far. The city has a plan of 80% zero emissions by 2050. Through our climate action plan, we have over 100 initiative teams throughout the city working on different projects of the GNR, TNT transportation, public facing, behind the fence charging, other means of transportation, and we'll be sharing some of those stories with you throughout the day.
Great, well, thank you all. And so, just to kick us off, and we can popcorn, everyone wants to jump in first, but it'd be great just to hone in on one particular success that you'd like to share, and in the telling of that success, if you could kind of unpack a little bit how you got there, kind of what was that journey to the success?
So one thing that, this is more of a soft, proud moment for me, but our fleet department brags that they haven't bought a standalone gas or diesel vehicles since the new director came in. Nice. So we're going to 3 years. And yeah, I mean, there's some propane biofuels, there's some other alternative fuels in there, but that's a point of pride for them, and they brag about that to the mayor and the deputy mayors, and that's something that we work with them when we got a new director in. I kind of laid out expectations and said, look, I'm always going to start electric first. That doesn't mean that we can't find other solutions, but just know that's the first question that's going to be out of my mouth, can it be electric? And they kind of outlaid their problems, they identified what they needed from me, and we helped them get there. And now, they're proselytizing about it. I don't have to worry about it. They're advocating to the other departments, they're advocating to electeds.
A success that comes from our department, but also was a part of a whole collective, was that for the 2020 Georgia rate case with Georgia Power, if you all aren't familiar, because of underestimated costs with coal and natural gas, the rate for utilities went up a lot. And so Savannah spearheaded a coalition to go to the rate case, and we were able to get that percentage down from 16 to 12, and how it pertains to electric vehicles is that Georgia Power has a make-ready infrastructure program, which helps install electric vehicle chargers. And we advocated and intervened to make sure that they butted most of that cost, and because of that, the only thing that you need to have a public-facing charger now in Georgia is just to purchase a charger. Georgia Power will install, it will basically maintain and do all the electrification needed. And that was because of the rate case intervention that we spearheaded.
So to share a couple success stories, so there's leads in every initiative team, and I sit on 2 in particular. TNT 4.1 and TNT 4.3, and that means nothing to you, but it means transportation and transit initiative teams. And those 2 teams are looking at 2 different initiatives. One is for behind the fence charging for city vehicles, and the other is TNT 4.3, and that's public facing. So some of our successes that we've accomplished thus far in about a year and a half is the TNT 4.1 is transitioning towards electrification behind the fence charging. We went into an agreement with a company called ICF, it's a consulting company. That study is to be commenced in December of 2023 of this year. That initiative will outline what we like to call our EV implementation strategy rollout. The reason we call it an EV implementation strategy rollout is because when I went to the city manager's office and explained a little bit about what the consulting costs were going to consist of, we used the word plan. And the plan wasn't digested very well in the city because there's been plans of those plans because of those plans. But nothing really established from those plans. It was just a plan of more of a white paper. So our study with ICF is actually what we call an implementation strategy rollout, meaning that come December, we're going to actually do what we say. And so in that plan, we looked at a variety of strategies, and we said, what we're going to do is we're going to look at our entire fleet as holistic as a whole. City of Raleigh is fairly large with respect to infrastructure and vehicles. We have over 4,600 vehicles in the fleet. It's a pretty big number. So we looked at those vehicles and pared it down and said which ones are really candidates for electrification and and which ones are actually street legal vehicles. And we looked at those and we decided there's about 2,200 vehicles that are electrifiable throughout the fleet consistently at this point in time. And so we have established that over the course of the next 10 years, we will electrify each and every 2,500 vehicles over the course of 10 years, looking at different type of candidates. We looked at total cost of ownership, we looked at infrastructure, we looked at ROI, how we're going to build the infrastructure, when we're going to roll it out, when those vehicles are going to be purchased, what type of infrastructure we're going to need, what type of software do we need to control it, what type of training do we need for our technicians, what type of training do we need behind the wheel of those end users, right? And so, and then obviously, how do we fund it? And so that implementation strategy rollout in December when it commences, as we're all already buying electric vehicles as we speak, obviously will be our roadmap. So when I retire, because you can probably tell that I'm no spring chicken, is that I can hand that over to somebody else and they can continue on with that exercise, right? And continue on and implement those vehicles as they roll out over the course of the next 10 years. And then not to talk too much about the successes, but on the TNT 4.3, that is the public facing. So what we're doing is we're looking at where do we put EV charging throughout the city, whether we own it or third party owns it, and what are the equities within those locations. So what we did is we built a heat map, and the heat map helps determine where there's potential for EV charging based on the community density of each area and equity inclusion in other areas within the city. And so that heat map identifies a criteria of point systems determine where the optimal sites for electrification is. And so now we've got a roadmap of determining where public charging can be throughout the city. And then we got really excited because we said, well, that's great, that's a tool, but wouldn't it be nice to be able to know where our EV chargers are now, and which one of those are public facing and which one of those are city chargers. So now in our heat map, now we can see where there's electrification for EV charging. Someone can go onto the map, see which ones are which color are public, which ones are behind the fence charging. And then we said, hey, why don't we think about where there's third-party charging as well on the heat map, so we don't overlap. Why build a charging station where there's already one block away? So now we're putting in where are those chargers, the third party. And then we said, hey, maybe we need to determine, that's for me, I'm busy. Then we decided, well, wait a second, don't we need to know where our employees live? Because as we start to establish take-home vehicles, we want to know, can they take those vehicles home or should they not take those vehicles home? And maybe we build park and rides. So in other words, we have charging stations and park and ride locations where an employee can come to work, pick up their electric vehicle, deploy back on the field, and never come to an office, because a lot of our field service workers don't go to offices. And so what we found is when we started looking at domiciles, we found out that a lot of city vehicles don't park in buildings, right? And a lot of the buildings don't have load demand in order to put in infrastructure anyway without transformers that can take over a year and a half to get, right? And then where do we park those vehicles? So what we found through telemetry, through GPS, is that a lot of vehicles are scattered throughout the city. So rather than try to build infrastructure where the vehicles are not, let's build infrastructure where the vehicles are. And so now we're planning park and ride so vehicles can come to a site, drop off their personal vehicles, deploy back in their city vehicles while they're being charged, and then go out and reverse the process. And while those city vehicles are out doing their work, those charges can also be available for the public. So it's kind of a joint effort. And then where do they live, putting dots on those heat maps will help us determine where those charging infrastructures can be, because the last thing we want them doing is putting a charger in the one corner but knowing they live in another corner of the world, right? So we want to make them convenient so they don't have to drive as far, because driving further means more gas consumption, more tailpipe emissions, and longer drive times. Those are just a few examples.
Yeah, well, it's really great, and yeah, go ahead.
If I can just add, I'll say, I want to give a shout out. Greg Sponseller used to be on the team. He came up with the heat map. We actually,
It's trademarked, so be careful.
well, Greg shared with me a non-proprietary list of your weights. We actually took that and replicated it and then developed our own tool, kind of a spin-off of the GIS.
We have lawyers.
I have no contact. I think it's maybe a parity thing. We added enough substantially, but we actually blended commercial viability with city priority. So we did the inverse of, like, not necessarily where they would perform well, but like where would be potential gaps where the city would need to step in. And so we developed that sort of map, and then also added in the ability, so if you use GIS online, you can drop a token and it'll give you like a footprint. So we also did like walkability sort of assessment from a charging point, so we can see a 5-minute, 10-minute, 15-minute walk on that. And so if we want to assess a site, we can drop a token, and then it'll calculate, you know, can they walk to laundromat, coffee shop, whatever it may be, as we look at it.
Great idea.
Yeah, I mean, so this is great. So I mean, in these 3 successes, right? I mean, we're hearing about, you know, a local government engaging in a regulatory process in order to open up opportunities for that local government and its communities. You know, we're talking about that sort of internal buy-in, you know, resulting in momentum to move things forward in the city, and some really creative ways in which to, you know, plan for and think about infrastructure rollout that's much more holistic than just, you know, looking at where you're going to drop, you know, chargers on the ground. And I think that all of these success stories are sort of indicative of the complexity, right, that local governments are dealing with. And I'm reminded about an environmental studies professor way back when who would like to remind us as students that complexity is a good thing, right? A natural ecosystem is profoundly complex, and in that complexity, you have high functioning. The issue is complication, right? Complicating the complexity is where the problem lies, right? And I think that we've been talking a lot so far about a lot of the complications, right? But I think it's important to remember that the richness is in this complexity. And so in thinking about that and kind of piggybacking on what you all were just talking about with the GIS mapping, can you speak a little bit about how you've leveraged either the successes you talked about already or other successes in order to sort of increase momentum for these initiatives, or to improve processes, or to kind of increase buy-in? So can you kind of speak to how successes lead to successes in your work so far, and feel free to popcorn.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say one, the kind of the fleet example where we did some initial groundwork. The challenge for those of you that are doing sustainability work, I repositioned my department 4 years ago to be an internal consultant. We just didn't have funds to do consulting, and a lot of other departments were kind of in the same boat. So I was like, what if we did the research, we help with the plans, let's offer that as a service and market that to other departments, and hopefully they do the work that we want them to do, rather than us trying to carry the load all the time. So putting what's a minimal amount of work, basically a development sprint behind, you know, like helping fleet, what are your problems? How do we bridge that gap between them as a customer and their needs, and what our desire, and maybe administration desire, community desire? How do we kind of push those together and have them build on it? And so they needed a policy. Essentially, when they operate like a car dealership, somebody says, I need a truck. And unless they have something in writing from the administration of some sort of like purchasing policy, they don't really have a ground to say, no, I don't think you need a truck. I think, you know, this light duty crossover will be sufficient. And I've heard enough of that around the room to know that we're not the only department dealing with folks that want to like cosplay as like multi-million-dollar developer. So, you know, we wrote the policy for them to do that. Now they champion it. It's the same for our public transit agency. They needed the framework. So can we come in and do the analysis, and then they built on it. And so, you know, they're not small asks. They take a significant amount of staff time. But what we're doing is trying to do that flywheel effort where you put in just enough in a short amount of time to try to like keep them moving. So a minimal amount of work for me, 4 to 6 weeks of work, turns into multiple grant applications, turns into multiple electric buses, turns into millions of dollars of loan, turns into, you know, capital plans to replace, you know, dozens of, you know, light duty vehicles. That's a payoff for me. So that's one way that we're trying to build on it.
With our, as a success with our rate case, with the Make Ready Infrastructure Program, we were able to add chargers because of that program, and also other city governments were able to utilize it as well to add chargers. And another success story actually came from something we it did not end up getting, but a company called EOS Links, who makes EV chargers, reached out to one of our staff, Alicia Brown, to just to connect and partner. And we were actually working on a grant for EV car sharing, similar to Zipcar. And they actually wanted to supply, if we were awarded the grant, supply the chargers for free at these locations in low-income neighborhoods for people who needed access to things like going to their job, if it's out of access to public transportation, or just going to the grocery store. And we ended up, unfortunately, not getting that grant, but we still wanted to make something out of that situation. So we continued our relationship and actually came up with a plan to add chargers for our community and additional for our city in 5 parks, which are in Veterans Memorial, Daffin, Mohawk, Veterans Memorial, and Gibble. And so, out of kind of that issue, we were able to make something better.
Are there any mayors or city council members in the room? Okay, we got one. All right, we'll talk around. I hate to say it, but mayors and city councils know nothing about EV charging or infrastructure. I shouldn't say all. Most of them don't, right, for the most part. They have this illusion that you buy a vehicle, you put a charger in the ground, boom, you're done, you're up and running, right? That's the perception they have. Why don't we have more? What's taking so long? So there's a lot of the success is built around communication and education, right? And so what we formed is a fleet executive committee to help disseminate some of these challenges and issues, to explain a little bit about the dynamic. It's not brain surgery, but there are a lot of moving parts, right? And one of the challenges that I came across is when I came to the city of Raleigh is that we didn't necessarily have a plan in place in order to start building infrastructure. So through the initiative team, we built the EV playbook, and that EV playbook dictates how both commercial and our own buildings can be built with EV charging infrastructure design. Not necessarily there needs to be a charger in the ground, but there needs to be prepared infrastructure such as trenching and laying pipes and conduit and stubbing out for electrical when that does happen. One of the other challenges we had was we were building charging infrastructures when new infrastructure was being built without communication through our sustainability. We work real close with Megan Anderson, if you know who she is, in sustainability with the city of Raleigh. But what was happening is we were buying chargers and putting in infrastructure without communicating throughout the city. So in building a communication path, we now have a way of determining when the charger goes into place. Who knows about it? Is there a standardization for chargers? We're bent on OCPP compliance, but a lot of chargers that were put in place many years ago were charge points, for example, right? If you know enough about charge points, you know they don't have an open protocol. So therefore, if you want to communicate to the vehicles and you want to know what vehicle plugged in, how long it was plugged in, how much kilowatt hours did it burn, what's the meter reading on the vehicle, none of that information was exchanged. So now we have a standardization in place to say this is the type of charger that we shall put in place, so we don't have a mixed bag of chargers throughout the city, and that's really important. One of the things that we've done is we've communicated that we think the number one thing in any of this part of the puzzle is the software. And we have a tendency to overlook that sometimes. We think that the charger of the vehicle is enough, but when you start to realize that when you plug in a vehicle 2 o'clock in the afternoon and it charges at 10 o'clock at night, that your energy costs are actually more than your petroleum costs are, because you're plugging in at peak hours. And so we want to make sure that when we do plug in at 2 o'clock in the afternoon at the end of the day, that charger doesn't turn on until after 9 o'clock p.m., right? And so we want to be able to control those infrastructures. So now we've got a standardization on both charging software and on hardware itself. There could be a multitude of options, but we want to keep it standardized amongst a few that can communicate to software.
That's great. So just to open it up, like having heard some of these successes and some of the background to how they got there, are there any successes or sort of journeys that you're all on that you would like to share and kind of bring forward to the group?
Stan?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Hey,
So,
John.
I'm sorry.
No, we go way back. I appreciate the joke. John Bonnet's town of Pittsboro, North Carolina, 5,000 people. And I'm also on the staff of the Clean Energy Technology Center at NC State University. And I wanted to go back to the heat maps. I've kind of humanized this story because I'm so glad both of you presented it. When Greg Sponsler created that tool, we were so enthusiastic because from the beginning he was talking about open source. He really wanted to make this tool accessible and just lay the path for others. he actually empowered and encouraged the folks in the GIS department to do this. And they wrote it up as a methodology. It's just 3 or 4 pages. But I hope that he's shared that with them, so many of you, and if you don't have it, I've also got it and I can share it. That encouraged multiple municipalities to then go on and recreate that. And I wanted to tie that back to Robin Reeves' question about how to prepare for these big grants. Because if you can do that in-house, if you can encourage your GIS folks to create that kind of plan, then you've got what you need for a fairly high-level overview of your local area, where the trouble spots are, where you need to put the charging infrastructure, where the folks of lesser incomes are, where the folks who have low car ownership are, and where the folks who actually do have car ownership, where the points of interest are, women and minority-owned businesses. So it's a really, really cool tool, and it used completely public data. So thanks for letting me humanize that.
No, I appreciate it.
Could that be sent around through SSCN or?
Yeah.
I've got it, and you've got it also.
And I'm happy to share it with anybody who wants.
And we did a webinar, and Greg talked about the tool, so that might be a little bit easier way to get people excited about it.
Yeah, and happy to share that. And we have a white paper as well that explains a little bit about it as well. Happy to share that with anybody that would like to see it.
Great. Anybody else want to share? Look, everyone's suddenly shy about their successes. All right. So we got.
So, Gordon Kennecott County, I just wanted to share a little bit of a story about how the first chargers that we got. We were renovating an office building that we were going to move a lot of people into, and it was in nobody's budget to put chargers in, and to my considerable amazement, and they'll never let me do this again, Georgia Power said, I'll give you on-bill financing. So I didn't even have to go to purchasing to buy these things. They just put them in. As a follow-up question, they're all dumb chargers. So I'm trying to figure 72 of them. Should I network these things, or am I just buying some new headaches?
And these are they publicly accessible or are they?
They are. They're accessible to employees. They were intended for our fleet, but it's kind of a pressure relief valve because we don't have enough chargers in other locations, so we can put them there. They're all level 2s.
Okay, so here's a controversial opinion that finance departments hate. You're probably not going to make money on it. If you network them, you think you're going to get a paycheck because you're going to get the billed revenue of people that use them. It's not going to be, unless you have 100% occupancy most days of the week. Like, we only have one garage that would actually be revenue positive, and it still didn't cover the networking fees on an average year. So you're never going to make enough money to justify going completely network there. That if your finance department demands that, obviously go for it, but that's one of the reasons I ripped out network units, because I was just hemorrhaging money. And I went to my finance director at the time and I said, Jim, I know you love getting this check. You know, you get a check from the company, they process the payments, and they say, here's your money. And I showed him the numbers of, like, here's what we're spending on network fees, here's my cost of replacement, here's the amount of calls that I've got. I'm spending like half my time dealing with failed units. Every time some kid smashes a screen in a park, you know, it's $900 to replace, you know, do a back panel replacement. I'm having to pull electricians in-house to go do this. I was like, here's a video of one that somebody beats with a baseball bat. That's really what I want to buy. The cost of replacement was like $600. There's no networking fees. And then I showed him the utility purchases that we had. So we had all of ours, we had them networked, but now I just actually go ahead and meter them. So I just meter my network charger so I know about how much they are using per year. And most utilities now, I think you're in a big enough utility that you probably actually have time of day, like by the hour, 15-minute interval data on when they're being used anyway. So you can get all the analytics you care about without the networking fees. So that would be what I recommend, but I know that that's controversial because people really like the idea of collecting the credit card information and making a couple bucks here or there.
So do you just turn them off during peak demand?
No, I just let them go. I mean, I mean, in our fleet operations where we have more control over when they charge, I mean, we have operational protocols to like avoid peak, but in a public setting, you can't really dictate it. And we weren't passing through peak demand charges, even in a public setting there. You know, somebody could still go in and we weren't making them pay more because they were charging on peak.
Right.
Quick question for you. Are you thinking about replacing them or just networking them?
There is a wireless network that I could put on these chargers. It's about $200,000 plus the fees. And I'd really rather spend my time putting more chargers where I need them,
Right.
rather than retrofitting the ones that I've already got.
The reason I say that because there is some application that's very affordable that makes dumb smart chargers smart. Right. So you can keep your dumb chargers and network them at a very affordable cost, and now without having to replace those. And one of the reasons we need to have a network is because we're looking at EV charging as a commodity. And so in the city of Raleigh, our fleet operations is what's called an internal service fund, not to bore you with a bunch of accounting philosophy, but we charge back for everything that we do. So at the end of the day, we're like a business, right? We need to recover our budget. And so our customers are who we charge back to. And our budget's around $18, $19 million. And so we need to recover that $19 million, which comprises of a lot of different moving parts. And so whenever someone plugs in, we treat it much like a fuel commodity. So whether it's gasoline, CNG, propane, renewable, E85, every time they charge for every hour is a kilowatt hour used, which is the equivalency to gasoline. So we're trying to recover that because the last thing we want to do is put the burden on our energy bill facilities, because facilities, while they like energy conservation, they're not necessarily in that business, right? But fleet is, and so we need to make sure that we're recovering those costs whenever a vehicle plugs in. So network is important to us, both public facing and EV charging behind the scenes.
Yeah, and just to, I'll come around, just take facilitator privilege for one moment to all of my friends in Georgia. Do be aware that the state legislature last session passed a law that is going to begin to charge a tax, a kilowatt hour tax at all charging stations. In the way in which the law is written, if you have a dumb charger, that will need to be ripped out and replaced with a network charger because that dumb charger cannot collect tax revenue. And so we have until 2025 to influence how the final law is written in Georgia. So feel free to come and talk to me later for my Georgia friends. It's a really important thing for local governments to get involved in order to be able to continue to put out non-network charging stations in Georgia.
Ken, do you expect that to raise to other cities?
We absolutely do. Yeah, I mean, legislatures right now are I think Rick's point was perfect. I mean, they're seeing EV chargers as a commodity that they can get revenue from. And the Georgia legislature's sort of rationale for adding this kilowatt hour tax, even though Georgia Power was very much against it, because they don't want people paying more tax on electricity that they already like to tax people on, is that there are drivers driving through the state with EVs who are not paying for the roads that they are driving on in Georgia. So they see a kilowatt hour tax at charging stations as a way to bring in some of that lost gas tax for the folks driving through. So it's meant to not harm residents, except the way the law is written, it will mean that Georgians are paying taxes on top of their already existing registration fee for their EV. All right, so we all come here, and then I saw a hand up here.
Hi, I'm Ben Sigelski, City of Oldsmar, Florida. Brian, this is kind of directed at you for the dumb chargers and the procurement aspect. So for your fleet vehicles, are those all charged on the dumb chargers? And then like how does the finance part of that work?
Not all of them. We do have some dumb chargers in our fleet. We have a couple applications where we have very large old buildings where we can't afford to maybe route new electricity, or like right now we have a bid to basically bring new service to one of our biggest offices. It's got to come in from a different side of the city because we're completely tapped out in like subterranean vaults. And so like, it's, you know, like a $250,000 project. So we do have some applications where we use network charging mainly for local load management, but everywhere else it's a closed fence system. So we just tap into a non-network charger.
I mean, like, how do you, the different departments that you have fleet vehicles for, how is that kind of like allocated with the energy prices?
So if we put in new service, my department pays for it. So I have a sustainability utility account, and any EV charging location that we have that's on a dedicated service gets billed to my department. So we pay it, and we get the breakdown of demand and use, and we can go into our account and see 15-minute interval data if we need it. But I mean, we don't do standalone service everywhere, obviously. Sometimes we just tap into available circuitry in a building. But we typically default to a dumb charger, just the cost of maintenance, the cost of replacement. We've had a lot of problems with Wi-Fi signalization, and like, you lose communication. Some of these say that they work when they don't have communication. Most of that's a lie. If they require on any sort of like load management or time of use or any sort of programming thing, once they lose cell connection, they really, really struggle. So we can't have that redundancy, or we can't have that sort of fail point. So typically I avoid it or have redundancy.
I might be able to shed a little more on that as well, in a different approach, and that's a great example. We haven't yet figured all this out, right? But we are talking through a couple models, and one of the models that we're talking about is putting on a cost for vehicle replacement. So we charge back, much like we do a commodity for kilowatt hours, we charge back a cost for vehicle replacement. And those internal customers pay, you know, if a vehicle costs $20,000 and it's a 10-year cycle, they pay $2,000 a year, and at the end of the day, hopefully they have enough money to replace that vehicle. Naturally, we need to increase those costs because the cost of an ICE vehicle is not going to be the same as an EV vehicle. Nevertheless, as we start to move towards bigger numbers, is to consider charging a cost for vehicle replacement to build seed money to build that infrastructure. So you as an owner of that gasoline vehicle today, or whatever commodity it is we would just charge on to that equipment replacement cost so that we have money to build infrastructure. Just a thought.
I would say also we're looking to partner on DC Fast and look at just corporate accounts and get out of port ratios and individualized sort of build outs. So trying to think more about it. So we're partnering with our utility to put in DC fast charging. We both see it as like a fueling strategy that we can tap into. And so we're putting some cash in, we're providing the location, they're putting cash in, then we've got a grant coming in, and we're looking at multiple projects.
All right, great. So we got a question here, and I see Heather next.
So yeah, to piggyback off of what you said, same sort of thing in Sarasota, that's where I'm from. We have, 22 chargers in a bunch of different locations, and they're all dumb chargers. So we are trying to figure out a solution with replacing them, and to echo again what you said as well, it's not feasible financially. We did all the math looking into the expenses for replacing them. So my question is for you, Rick. You had mentioned some solution to make dumb chargers smart. Is that a cloud-based solution? How does that work?
Yeah, that is correct. And so what it does is it uses a switching gear. So Cyber Switching is one of the companies in the industry. Cyber Switching has worked with various different fuel management systems, and what they do is they actually build that communication from the dumb charger to a switching port, and that switching port is now able to communicate to a cloud-based environment to authorize the transaction of each dumb charger. So therefore, what's really happening is that dumb charger is now becoming a smart charger because all that information is being ported into the cloud that you can have access to. And there's a couple of different solutions like that that can do the same thing.
Yeah,
Make a dumb charger smart.
Yeah, and just to remind everyone too of the new DOE program that Stephen was pointing us to for doing charger replacements, that there may be opportunity to, if you need to upgrade your charger, that may qualify as a replacement. So just be paying attention to that funding source if you need to move from non-network to network, or if you need to add additional capabilities to your charging system.
Hi, Heather Bullock, City of Charlotte, North Carolina. I was just wondering, Brian, about
you talked about policy around replacing vehicles, and when you said that they're proud your fleet management has not purchased a traditional ICE vehicle. I mean, that is really amazing. Yeah. And so I just wanted to ask you a little bit about your policy, and I'm sure I'll be following up to get your policy from you. But we have a policy. We have several really great policies, but implementation is another thing. And we have a tiered system where, EV obviously is the first choice, and then you go from there. But I was just wondering if, you are in your policy, if you have, because I'm thinking about we might need to revise the policy is what I'm getting at. And like, one of the things I've been thinking about specifically is around cascading of vehicles. And, we have I don't know if y'all have a centralized fleet, we have a decentralized fleet, which makes things very challenging. And so I guess, was wondering like the secrets of success on that for, do you do cascading? Because that to me seems like essential.
I love that you're asking this because we stole your policy from Erica.
Plagiarism.
We
love the company.
I mean, this is what the network's all about. The one thing that we found that was missing, I mean, obviously the bones of the policy that y'all had that was from the Electrification Coalition, kind of that bare bones approach, was it lacked the total cost of ownership sort of analysis. And so that's what we had to work with our fleet on, is getting historical data and basically developing the comparisons. So we worked with them on typicals to say, like, what are you looking at? Let's actually work through the thought process. And then we worked out the typicals for like a TCO evaluation of replacements. And so, I mean, I don't love supporting propane biofuel. I mean, that's not my first choice. That's not where I lead with. But if the TCO works out on it and the application works out on it, it's the best solution that I've got right now. So, but, we did the math to help them justify the TCO on propane biofuel. And then I told them, I was like, I don't love this. I'm glad that it's moving the needle. I'm glad there's some reduction in emissions. And I know that the guys love that it's like a 500-mile fuel, between the two tanks, that they just like love the range on those. And they came back and said, okay, well, what if we did renewable propane? What if we did, and it's like, it doesn't necessarily make me still feel great about the scope 1 emissions, but, at least they're trying to meet me somewhere in the middle. And that's kind of the like tit for tat. How do we negotiate an inch forward on this? And, it's a 3-legged race. I don't know that it's perfect, but that was one thing that we found was missing, is like, here's the policy. And they go, okay, well, we don't know how to do total cost of ownership. And then, so we had to go and pull like past purchases, find out the typicals, find out their purchasing price. We put that together and send the numbers back to them. And then they go sit down with purchasing and compare the numbers. And honestly, it's like right on the line. The EV versus our traditional sedan, like a Ford Fusion hybrid, once you adjust for inflation, it's basically like the same thing. So that was a pretty easy justification, but they just didn't have the numbers. They were just dealing with almost misinformation to kind of harken back to day one of like, well, they're so much more expensive. And so we actually pulled their maintenance records and we did that for them.
Thanks.
And I'd like to add to that, Heather, and thanks for bringing that conversation to the topic, because that's really important. And love to see what you have, and maybe we do plagiarize yours as well.
It's a good one.
It's a good one, right? Plagiarism is the best form of flattery, right? So I'd love to see yours, and we are cascading though. And to Brian's point, yes, I'd love to have every vehicle EV in the fleet, but let's face it, it's not always doable, right? In every single situation, and sometimes we have vehicles that still have a life cycle to them. And so, while you may not necessarily like propane, right? I'm an advocate of it to a certain degree, and I think we all have bridge technologies. There's no silver bullet, and it's probably not going to happen all tomorrow. So we need to look at other ways of doing vehicles or converting vehicles to a more sustainable environment where they still have a useful life cycle. So for example, we have 50 vehicles that are on propane, we've converted them all to renewable propane. So we're proud to say that we're the first North Carolina agencies to run renewable propane, which is a complete non-petroleum product, right? And we're doing a ribbon cutting actually on the 28th of April, or 28th of September, and you're all welcome to come out. And we're doing an energy coalition type of Triangle Clean Cities is going to be there, NC's Good Date's going to be there, and we're looking at promoting not only our propane renewable efforts, but also sustainability effort as well. And so there's actually, ironically enough, there's actually a propane renewable vehicle that actually can charge an EV vehicle. Now I know that sounds like perpetual motion, but it is, right? It's actually a propane vehicle, comes out and actually plugs in an electric vehicle and charges it. So there's all kinds of bridge technologies. I encourage that we look at a variety of different avenues to get us where we want to be, you know, and not do this in the future.
This question is for Janet. I'm Brittany with Little Rock, Arkansas. And like the city of Savannah, we have a clean energy target. I'm wondering, it sounds like a lot of these policies live in separate places and separate buckets, and I'm wondering how, and I know you just came in and you are getting it, girl. Like, you're doing really good. How did the city of Savannah and these other cities incorporate the clean fleet into your clean energy target? And what are the strategies for the gap that's going to be left over for diesel and gasoline that will still be in the fleet, you know, come 2030, 2035 potentially?
So from my understanding, because this was before I got here, at least when we first got electrical vehicles, they were leased, and that was in 2019. Nick Deffley, who's standing up, he was over that. Those were leased, and I believe it had come from actually like community efforts, like ever since 2016. It wasn't just like the city who was into that, it was also the community that were really trying to getting to, you know, increasing, well, not increasing, but decreasing pollution that comes from exhaust and, you know, all those things. But with our cities, it is a lot because for sustainability, at least, we do work with transportation and mobility. We do not handle like the utilities with clean energy, with the cars. Currently, we have a fleet of 36, I believe, so it's 11% of our fleet at the moment. And I'm not the most familiar with the other cities and how many are in their fleet. Nick, do you know anything?
I don't on the other fleet size, but I would just say yes to everything that Janet just said. Part of the impetus for Savannah going in this direction was around the 100% clean energy goals that we had, and that was very much community driven. And all of our council members were behind that. Prior to that even happening, we were talking about EV fleet transition, and I feel like we're showering a lot of praise on Georgia Power in some of these conversations, and they really did help. They had another program, Will It Work, I believe, and some of the other Georgia folks might know about that, but it was essentially, they'll bring in a few electric vehicles for us to try and do the data metrics piece on. I don't know if Athens, Clark County did that as well, but that gave us foundation to go ahead and start with 2 leafs and just try it out in our parking services group. And I know Kira's here today, and that was just based on the operations of those vehicles. Like, let's test it in a place where vehicles are maybe going 30 to 80 miles a day, but they're just all downtown kind of enforcement vehicles. And so started there, gathered that data, and then from a fleet management side, we moved to leasing versus purchasing and capitalizing our vehicles. And that allowed for this bigger transition that Janet started talking about. We didn't have any hybrids in our fleet at that point either. So we transitioned, I think, to at least 98. Now it's maybe 120 hybrids, and then all the electrics that Janet just mentioned.
So are you saying that because you don't own it, it doesn't end up on your inventory, therefore, like you're meeting your emissions reduction because you don't have to claim it?
No.
Okay. How does leasing help solve that?
You get more bang for your buck.
And it helps in the market transition. I mean, you know, we're still in a weird way like early adopters to a technology that's out there that we don't know if this vehicle is really going to be the one that really fits our operational needs the best, but we're going to try the Nissan Leaf now. We're going to try the Bolt now. We're going to, Still waiting on the F-150 Lightnings and all that other stuff, but I mean, I think the idea is it was a way to act like it's a pilot project, so we could talk about bringing in an electric vehicle, try it out for a little bit, and if we don't like it, the lease allows us to just immediately transfer to something else. There will be a minor cost, but that was palatable.
Lee Huffman, Memphis and Shelby County, Tennessee. Similar to Charlotte, Shelby County has a decentralized fleet, about 1,200 vehicles, and so, you know, where we can and where vehicles are kept on county property, we are trying to go the dumb charger route. But I am interested to see what y'all have thought about for interdepartmental billing of if for like DC fast chargers, because those are likely going to be used by multiple different departments, whereas a dumb charger is probably only going to be 1 or 2 vehicles specific to a department, so we can have that meter tied in to their building so that that department pays for that electricity through their budget. But I'm wondering what you're doing for more of the shared solutions and how you're addressing that within fleet management and how fueling is working going forward.
Rick really dive into this because he's got a better mechanism, I think, for billing departments. We don't, in Knoxville, we do not have a really good mechanism for billing other departments. We are looking at charging as a service sort of solutions specific for DC fast for fleet operations. And the way that we've talked about managing that is basically so our drivers already have fuel man cards. I'm assuming yours probably do too. I think that's kind of the standard. So we would essentially just look at a corporate account, assign that to the individual, and then their account would be tied to their individual budget. So when they swipe, they charge, then they would automatically get billed through that to that provider.
Wow, there's a lot to that question, right? But thanks for bringing it to the subject. A couple things that we're doing is we're fortunate we're replacing, without getting into a whole different subject, our fuel management system, right? And that fuel management system is a device that every time a vehicle pulls up to the fuel island, which we have 7 of them, then the nozzle goes into the vehicle. They know which vehicle fueled up, what meter reading was on the vehicle, because that's critical for preventative maintenance and knowing total cost of ownership, miles traveled, which vehicles are candidates, right? And so that's how we charge back to those internal customers, is through our fuel management system. And that system is interfaced with our fleet management information system, which is our true system of record, right? So we can charge back to customers. So in the midst of replacing our fuel management system, we're looking at a solution that can do all the commodities, from compressed natural gas to E85 to gasoline to electrification to renewable propane. So it's one repository that can handle all of the commodities and then charge back to the customers. And so we're looking at a system called eVerse. And if you've ever gotten fuel in your personal vehicle, you've used a eVerse system, which is a Gilbarco product. Gilbarco product owns about 90% of the retail fueling infrastructures across America. They are the component that does the point of sale at every retail gas station. They also have a public access and a behind the fence charging system. So what we're going to do is we're going to use that system to manage all of our EV transactions and all of our fuel commodities as well. And we can do that through behind the fence charging and public access at the same time, so that you can simply swipe a credit card or RFID card or a fob or whatever mechanism to authorize the public access, and all that information is available to our sustainability, to our finance, to our fleet, to our other departments, based on a permission level driven application that whoever wants to see it, when they want to see it, and what it is that they want to see. Another thing that we're doing is we're also doing a motor pool application, kind of like a scooter application, where in the previous years, a motor pool was based on either a key on a hook or a kiosk where someone would walk up, create a reservation, walk up to the point where the vehicles are at, put in a code on a box, the box opens up, the key pops out, and you drive your vehicle away. Kind of good technology, but old legacy technology. So our new technology is through RideCell, which RideCell is a component of a GeoTap telematics solution. And what I'm getting point is that this is what cleans up the solution. So no longer is that vehicle tethered to a box anymore. It simply sees a reservation, and when you walk up to the vehicle, kind of like you do the scooter technology on the street, is you walk up to the vehicle, it recognizes the transaction through your smartphone or in any way enabled device, web-enabled device. It unlocks the doors, and then the vehicle is able to be driven without even a key in hand. So the key is embedded in the vehicle, and so you never need a key. You just simply push the button to start, you drive the vehicle, you use that motor pool vehicle, and then you can take it back to another site if you wanted to. It doesn't need to go back to the site that you picked it up. So technically there could be motor pool anywhere. And so while we do have permanent locations, we are electrifying all those motor pool vehicles so that city employees can use those vehicles at their discretion. And those costs are then charged back to the internal customers. And I know that was more information than you probably wanted.
No, that was wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's really exciting to see, you know, the sort of convergence of, you know, the movement towards electrification for all the climate, air pollution, total cost of ownership, but also seeing the technology sort of coming of age to really support these transitions in dynamic ways. And just to speak for the poor non-network chargers who keep being called dumb here, I mean, they're chargers too.
Right. It's funny that you say that, because back in the days of the compressed natural gas era, they had fast chargers and slow chargers, right? And so the word slow charger was a negative term, so they're called time chargers, not, you know, slow chargers.
It might be difficult to ask your leaders to support your acquisition of dumb equipment.
Hi, I'm Mike Wharton with Athens, in Athens, Georgia. A couple of things that we did that may be relevant to folks is to help transition the fleet. We created a fund where we go in with our fleet managers and we pay the difference between the gas power and the electric vehicle. So it really doesn't cost them anything, so it encourages them to do that. We also help install the EV chargers that go with that. And for our public safety, which we all know are not necessarily the tip of the spear for change when it comes to wanting to get EV chargers, if you give your police chief and your corrections chief a Mach-E,
They like it.
they are on board with you. You don't have to worry after that. They'll all be right there. Fire department's in there too.
And I'm so excited because my little town of Weaverville, North Carolina is represented here at the front table, including our police chief, who has on his phone a picture of the new Mach-E in his fleet. So if you want to talk to a police chief that's way ahead of the curve, he's in the room.
I have one question for the panel and one comment for the group. My question is regarding level 2 chargers. Did any of you have any, or are you operating any that are 9, 11, or 19 kilowatt output at this point?
Yeah, we do have some that are 19.2 delivery. I would say that by and large, like the 40 amp charger is just too slow for most applications. We've been at a minimum spec in 50 amp. Depends on turnover, kind of depends on use case in a fleet application. Most of our fleet applications, the car's there for 13, 14 hours a day for current replacement. So we can pretty much give them whatever. I mean, we can plug it into a standard wall outlet and they'd probably be fine. But we do spec them a 50 amp minimum. In some of our public locations where we may want a little bit more turnover, that's where we're starting to put the 19.2 where we know there's not a lot of charging assets. So we may want to get that person out of that stall a little bit faster. And it may not be a place where there's a lot going on, so they're not going to want to sit around, and that's where you get into like plug share complaints about, well, there's nothing here, why'd they put a charger, I had to sit here for 6 hours. I read those, I take them personally.
And we have some, and let's face it, most of our chargers are L2 chargers. We are looking at building some fueling hubs with some DC fast chargers through our consulting efforts. One thing that we did find out that, you know, we could spend $600,000 to put in a DC fast charger at some of these fuel hubs. The challenge is that it doesn't necessarily do it as much good as we literally think it should, right? For example, if you take a Nissan Leaf or another sedan vehicle, that vehicle denigration of that battery will extremely be reduced if you go to a DC fast charger all the time, and it may not even get the full charge that you ultimately want it to. So we think that in cases of sedans and smaller vehicles, an L2 is probably a better fit than a DC fast charger considering the expense. And so we've looked at the miles traveled, and they don't generally warrant a DC fast charger at most of those locations. We can get away with an L2. And even a plug-in, right? I mean, most of the vehicles don't travel that far. It's just really a matter of managing the consumption when it's plugged in.
So just real quickly, my comment for the group, because I bet there are some people that might not know about this, but in North Carolina, there is a company called Atom Power, ATOM, and they have recently patented the first solid-state circuit breaker that has no electromechanical moving parts and is programmable and controllable, so that without a level 2 charger, you can program a circuit panel with these new patented circuit breakers to control the output, control the charging cycle, track the charging cycle, and report the energy usage. And so it provides an opportunity to get beyond the level 2 charging equipment and actually have more control and more versatility and options by connecting electric vehicle charging cords directly to this new circuit panel. So it's Atom Power, ATOM, and I don't work for them or anything, but I'm definitely doing this.
Can I, what was your name? I'm sorry.
Miner from Forsyth County.
Miner. Interesting that you brought that subject up. So we are doing an energy block grant as we speak. Literally, it's happening while I'm on traveling this week. And we are putting in some costs for our energy block grant in the sum of around $300,000. And we are heavily looking at Atom Power. We're trying to build some pilot programs right now. And it is great technology, and I was going to bring that up. If anybody's not heard of Atom Power, you need to definitely look them up. They're an amazing technology charging provider. They're very unique in a couple of different ways, is that not only is Atom Power able to manage energy load by using circuit breakers rather than the charger actually managing the charges, the system can then turn circuit breakers on and turn circuit breakers off, or if vehicles are plugged in and there's a high energy use for your air conditioning, then what it does is it turns down the charging for the vehicles and allows the building to cool down, and then when the compressors are off, then it turns on the power on the chargers to consume obviously the power input. So you can have a balance, so you can literally take one level 2 charger and you can put in 12 ports literally for the same amperage. Right, which is really cool. And the second part of that advantage is that because it's a circuit power driven application, is that every charger that you have in the ground, dumber, not so dumb, and smart chargers are literally electrified all the time. So you've got high voltage at those chargers and you have ballers around them. So if the vehicle ever hits it through the baller, you've now ran into 260 volts of energy, right, which is sometimes a safety issue. So what Atom Power does is only sees energy at the pedestal only when the vehicle is plugged in and not full energized all the time, right? So there's a couple benefits. And they're also a North Carolina company and uses North Carolina equipment, and they're Buy America certified. So if you are approaching for grants, that's a big thing because we were using BTC chargers, but BTC chargers are not made in America and they don't qualify Buy America certified. So Heather can speak on this because I know the city of Charlotte went out for an RFP, and I think there's some of that might have been, it may not be public yet. They looked at Atom Power as well. So great technology. Thanks for bringing that subject up.
Had to chime in on that one. After a very long year of work, we have finally had our council pass our contracts. One of those being with Atom Power. So we're really excited to partner with them for all the reasons that everyone's mentioned. I also just want to say, to give them a little bit of a plug, because they, for the MWSB Eagle, for the RFP, they doubled it. And I just, that just really put them at the top of my list. I mean, I was just really thrilled to see that from them, and of course I'm very proud that they're from the Charlotte area, North Carolina company. So yeah, Atom Power.
Talking about, needing to obviously track federal funding, that's a main reason why we're here, but with how quickly the technology is developing, I wonder if SSDN or some other entity might not start a technology tracker. Right, because there is real movement here, and the thing to remember is that an EV charger is not an EV charger. right? The charger's in the vehicle, right? All what we call an EV charger, dumb or smart. It's just a plug. It's just a plug, right? And that opens up a tremendous amount of technology that we haven't even been thinking of yet, like what Atom Power is tapping into. So that sort of technical understanding of the technology is important, but I think what's also important is just tracking the rapid movement in the market. A movement that's being accelerated because of all the federal funding that's coming down. On the private sector side, where I used to play, what this is doing is it's encouraging investors to invest, right? There's now $1 trillion market, right, for this technology that wasn't there before, right? And because of all this federal funding flowing, there's also the guidance that's dictating sort of with more clarity how technologies are going to be positioned to win, what they need to do, where they need to be made, where the parts need to come from, et cetera. That's all creating certainty for investors that has not been there. So there's a ton of private capital that's been waiting for this moment of increased certainty to begin to push technologies really quickly in this space. So just expect over these next 3 to 5 years a lot of movement in the EV charging space, and keeping up with that is going to be really important. And even to the point we were talking about earlier, and that Stephen brought up in his presentation about the North American Charging Standard, right? This NACS standard coming on board, and its standardization being fast-tracked right now. Even that can get really confusing, right? I mean, I've heard in this room and in other conversations about people being reticent to move forward with DC fast charging until this is rectified. But truth is, even the CCS combo connector charger that gets deployed today can easily be transitioned over to a NACS charger. It's just taking off the cord and the plug, putting the new cord and plug on, and removing a circuit board and replacing it with another one, right? It can be that simple, and now it's communicating and working on the North American Charging Standard. So point being, some of these technological advancements seem overwhelming when really they're quite simple, and the market is totally prepared to make that transition as necessary, and it's actually nothing you all need to worry about, right? And nothing your leadership needs to worry about. Then there's other technological movements that can be profound and you need to have your eyes on them. And understanding which is going to be really important, as things start to speed up. So that's just my plug for paying attention to the technology, because it's shifting.
This comment is about technology deployment and technological adoption. Who in this room is aware of market penetration studies and technology deployment curves? Come on, surely some folks who've seen the curves of adoption of cell phones, for example, early adopters, this kind of language. We are all in the business of helping to deploy technologies that are commercially proven, but aren't yet really adopted in the market, right? That's what we're trying to do, because that's what climate mitigation is about, is pushing out these technologies. The exciting thing about the Atom Power technology, in my opinion, as somebody who I'm paid full-time to work on technology adoption, technology deployment, is we all acknowledge we've also got to drive down the costs of electric vehicle charging, right? The equipment. Otherwise, folks with modest means are not going to be able to afford chargers. So, by supporting this particular technology, the solid-state circuit breaker, we're buying into a technology that has far fewer components, is designed for manufacturing, and hopefully, once they get up to scale, they will be able to outcompete those chargers that sit on top of a stanchion and have every single one of them has its own cellular modem on it. And also save some money on those communication costs, those network costs, because then you have one communication hub for 12 chargers. So I hope y'all will think about that. While right now the prices for the purple charger are not competitive. We're all in that business of trying to push out technologies in the direction we need to evolve. Thank you for letting me share that.
Hi, I'm Melody in the city of Clearwater, Florida. I have two questions. So one is also on the technology part. Has anyone tried solar-powered mobile charging unit, and how's their experience? And then second question is a simple one. Like, do you have any guidance on whether we need to have a separate meter for each charging station or charging group? Because our utility provider does have a rebate for if we get new EV charging stations, but the effort in getting a new meter and like pulling all the wiring and stuff doesn't seem like it would justify the rebate at all.
So I'll talk a couple points. I may hand the mic over to Brian because he might have a little more knowledge and respect to the charging portion of it. We have 2 solar canopy array beam arc units being delivered in November, and we're applying for a 3rd. And if you've not seen the canopy array beam units, I highly encourage you to look at them. Set in place, they're mobile, they can be moved, no installation, no permitting, just literally sits in a parking spot. Doesn't occupy any more spaces. You can park on the ramp and to the right and to the left of it. So we're looking at those as a means of transition, mainly for public facing, not necessarily for behind the fence charging, just because of the simplicity of dropping them in place, right? So we are advocates of the solar array. And we're also looking at solar farm charging as well, for not being units, but actually more permanent farm array solar panels as well for charging. But to get back on the atom power and the technology, one thing that is unique is that, and you mentioned it, Dan, that I think is a misnomer, is that we all think that thing sitting on the ground is actually the charger. You're right. I'm glad you brought that up because the charger's in the vehicle, and that's why sometimes you can, but you're not benefiting from a DC fast charger because the vehicle can't accept it, even though it's putting out a lot of energy, right? But one thing you might want to look at as well is telemetry. If you're not using GPS in your fleet, talk to your fleet about how they're using telematics. So with the atom power and other ones alike, our telematics can manage the transaction. So we don't need an RFID, we don't need a credit card, we don't need an app on our phone. The telematics actually identifies the vehicle. So when it pulls up to the portal, or pulls up to the port, I should say, it reads that telematics information, automatically pulls in the transaction, already knows the meter reading of the vehicle, already knows the unit number, and there's no transaction had. You simply walk up to the vehicle, plug it in, and it takes that information because the telematics is plugged into the OBD2 computer of the vehicle, so it knows when a vehicle is now being charged. So it doesn't have to then have a means of authorization of transactions. So I'm going to put you on the spot, Brian, if you can answer any questions you might on the charging technology side.
We do not have EV arc. We don't have the beam unit, we don't have the tree unit, we don't have enough money, just to be frank, to be able to get those. And that competes with other projects that we want to do. And I mentioned money specifically just because whether or not you're going to sub-meter or not, kind of like we evaluate that whether or not we have the existing electrical capacity or if we need to reserve a certain amount of electrical capacity at a building. And how do we minimize costs? So like if I can't go into that panel, yeah, I'm going to bring a new service in and plant the charger with a dedicated service. I've got to. If I don't have to, I'm not going to spend that money. And that's, I mean, I hate to make it that simple, but that's generally how we evaluate it. We're not worried about the individual dispensation information. If that's important to you, there are energy loggers, there are sub-meters that you can put in place that don't require your utility, that you can put basically on a circuit and get that reported to you in a dashboard. They're very, very common. Any sort of like energy services company or any performance company is going to have that. You can just go buy it yourself if you got a really good electrician too, and they can just basically put a C-clamp on a circuit. There's a small communication device that you put on a Wi-Fi network or plug it in, and then you log into a website and you can pull whatever data you want if the data is important to you. And that's a lot cheaper.
Yeah. And I would imagine software can manage that as well by knowing the kilowatt hours used. So you don't need a meter on itself because obviously that would be an expensive investment, I would think.
You know, one thing that's really interesting here in this conversation is that, we're sort of transitioning from this moment, we're talking about electrifying your fleet, getting back to that complexity and complication dynamic, was adding a whole bunch of complication. And now with technology that's emerged, you're actually reducing a whole bunch of complication potentially, whether it's as simple as how you're tracking utilization or how you're thinking about collecting data. All of a sudden you're able to show up with solutions that actually simplify, instead of complicate.
I just want to make a comment to Melody's first question. Ashley City of Baltimore, Florida. So to comment off of Melody's first question about the solar mobile charger, City of Fort Lauderdale in Florida has it, and Glenn had one. A few years ago, we did a tour with them, but they have a lot of information on that. I think they originally bought it for more emergency management in case power goes down, then their fleet can also operate, but they would have at least a few years information and data on that.
So I wanted to transition a little bit and go back to the public safety piece of this. We also gave our emergency management guy a Mach-E. He loves it. Still, though, most of the police force just says no. The other piece of that that's a real problem is that we are such a sprawling region. It's not unusual for a police officer to drive 40 or 50 miles to get to where he's going to work or she's going to work, and ditto going home. And we want them to be in these take-home vehicles. So I'm really struggling with how we're going to make that work for the reality that these guys have take-home vehicles, drive 40 or 50 miles one way to get to work, and they will never accept an EV unless they can charge it at home. And is that the only answer, or do you have something else?
So the stat that everyone hears about, the percentage of how often an EV owner charges at home versus charges on the road, that's really just out of necessity. Like, you almost have to throw that out as a statistical point, because that's the only place that they've been able to charge. If you don't have DC fast charging, you don't have public charging infrastructure, how would you charge away from your house? And then you've also got the decision tree of somebody looking at their footprint and where they're going, and they're like, I can make that decision for myself. So I kind of look at that as like an aberration of data. You're like, in 5 years from now, I doubt we'll be looking at it the same way. We'll probably be looking at more trends towards district level charging, DC fast charging, especially as NEVI comes online, and you start to, people feel more comfortable making that what's essentially like a macroeconomic shift in adoption. So, not to dwell on that too much, your conversation with your police officers about how you're dealing with charging infrastructure, it is costly, but you have to be thinking about how you identify opportunities for that district level charging to get that turnover. So that downtown project that I'm talking about, where we're working with our utility to essentially put in a DC fast charger that we both identify as a fleet need. They are also looking, we applied at multiple quadrants for grant funding to try to get dispersed charging assets that would be for us the groundwork for where we could fuel. So for them, they're, I think 5 counties, 7 counties. So they cover so many counties. They're like, we want to have EVs, but we have the same range issue. If somebody's in one of our vehicles, they might have to go the next county over. They can't come back to our central location and charge up in the compound. So that's where we kind of work together. And I said, I've identified this as an area, here's an area, and then they added their own. We actually put a grant package kind of together for us to go see if we could find that. And I offer, what I could, which is a land resource in some location or a cash resource to match the construction readiness. And then they fronted some other, but we both viewed it as a shared sort of asset. They did the same thing with us for compressed natural gas, where they put in a fueling station. It was really for them and then for us, and then we just made it available for the public. So that kind of shifted the mentality of like, let's just put it's a publicly available asset that we also rely on for our operations. And I don't know of another way around it. You're not gonna, my finance director, there's no way they're gonna approve an investment in, a police officer's home for a charger. We don't have enough opportunities for park and ride, and we wouldn't have, I don't think, the acceptance on an individual level that they would be like, I'm not gonna park my police car here, swap to my truck or whatever, and then go home when this guy doesn't have to. So you have to have the fast charging assets. I don't think that there's a way around it.
Well, and I also don't know if it warrants the L2 charger at every home, right? We're going through a pilot take-home program as well, and it will focus on PD and fire slightly different than public works and other departments. But I'm not sure that an L2 is really required at every site, right? So I think it's a one-on-one basis. You have to assess what really warrants a take-home vehicle and what really is the range. And and how do they charge? I mean, let's face it, every EV vehicle comes with a 110 charger, a trickle charger. So, I mean, based on the characteristics of the dwell of each vehicle, you may not need to put a L2 charger at home. I mean, you kind of have to leapfrog your plan and where do you get energy from travel, from work to home and then back again. And there's a multitude of opportunities to get charging without having to plug in at home, or at least maybe fast charging at home. I don't know if everybody's heard of WEX. It's a CFN, it's a Central Fuel Network Industry. And most fleets across America use some form of a WEX application. I know the city of Raleigh does, and I think everybody I've spoken to as well, as a means of a contingency or doesn't have a fueling infrastructure in their city. So what WEX is doing is they're now building charging infrastructure at each and every gas station that they have across America. And they have now an app that you can actually download, and that WEX is treated just like a fuel card. And so if you have a fuel card already in your city, you use that fuel card the same way you do for EV charging. They have DC fast charging and they have level 2 charging. You pull up to that site, you swipe your card, and you stay there as long as you can to get enough energy to leapfrog to the next location. So let's think of our cell phone as an example, right? My cell phone hovers around 50 to 60% charged most of the time. I mean, rarely do I ever see it at anywhere between 90 and 100 unless I'm at home and it's plugged in, right? It usually sits around 50 to 60%. And then when you get to the workplace or you get to home, you plug it in, you hopefully let it charge a little more and get you to the next place. And I think that's how we have to look at EV electrification, is leapfrogging from one location to the next and not necessarily being 100% charged. And truthfully, you don't want it to be 100% charged, because if a vehicle is charged or your cell phone is charged at 80%, it takes more energy to get from 80 to 100% than it does to get from 0 to 80. So, you know, I don't know that it warrants a take-home vehicle charging application in every situation.
Yeah, no, great. And so
being devil's advocate. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I think that devil's advocate's important, and I think the is part of that conversation about technology, you know, change and adoption. It's also recognition that there are a number of gas stations all in. So Circle K is putting 150 kilowatt charging assets at all Circle Ks around the country. They're just going one by one, and they're going quickly, right? And so there's companies like that are now going to become opportunities for refueling, you know? And so how much of that responsibility, especially for those take-home vehicles, are going to be borne by the city, as opposed to how much of that can be satisfied by the private sector, because there might be Circle K gas stations, as an example, you know, within range of where those employees live. And you can, instead of worrying about meeting that need with city-owned property, you can have a relationship with Circle K and they can charge that. You know, so I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities emerging. They are emerging that weren't here, you know, a year or two or three ago.